This is a 1989 Austin Rover Mini Mayfair, and it is in very, very good condition. But we'll get to that later. Today I'm not going to be talking about the story of the Mini as a whole, that's just far too long-winded. Instead, I'm going to be extra nerdy and talk about how the Mini survived through the 80s and evolved into the 90s as part of a rather niche market. First though, a bit of background. The Mini had been British Leyland's volume small car for 21 years between 1959 and 1980, but in October of that year BL launched the Austin Metro. It was their first new car for 4 years and the start of Michael Edwards' product-led recovery that hoped to bring the company back to success. The Metro effectively replaced the Mini, but along with its contemporaries it was a little bit bigger than the car that started the craze. That's where the term Super Mini came from. As a result, BL made the decision to keep the Mini in production as a cheaper, smaller economy model. In 1981, Mini sales were down to 1,150 a week as most buyers went for the much more modern Metro. As a result, the range was enormously rationalised down to just 2 models, the Mini City and Mini HL, but that didn't mean development stood still. The Mini got an 80s makeover, stripping away the chrome and replacing it with grey plastic for the grille, bumpers and door handles, then a lighter grey for the wheel trims. All models got the Clubman style instruments and in 1982 the revised A+ engine from the Metro. These early 80s Minis also had much better soundproofing than their predecessors. This is a Mark V Mini built 30 years into the production of Izagonis' iconic little creation, and it's from an era when the Mini wasn't an entirely well-loved car, and certainly a low seller compared to your Metros and Fiestas. The Mark V was launched in 1984 and modernised the car further, bringing it closer in line with the Metro. The wheels grew from tiny 10s to 12 inches, the same as the Metro, with 145/70 tyres. Above them, these plastic arch extensions became standard across all Minis. Also standard were front disc brakes, and it's slightly hard to believe that it took until 1984 for disc brakes to become standard on Minis that weren't Coopers or 1275 GTs. In addition to the discs is a brake servo under the bonnet, new for 1989. This was not to say that things were all rosy. Austin Rover had planned to kill the Mini off in 1986, but production carried on. The mainstream range wasn't doing very well. The Metro was starting to age badly while the Maestro and Montego couldn't take on Ford and Vauxhall. The Mini was expensive and tricky to build, but Austin Rover saw the potential and began exploiting it. After the Metro emerged, the Mini was ignored, but they picked on its inalienable character at Christmas 1986 when an advert was shown featuring 2 Minis kissing under a mistletoe with the line, "Minis have feelings too." That was the sign that Austin Rover had started to care again. From this point on, the Mini started to see a little bit of a revival, as it was more of an alternative buy than a Metro or Fiesta. Buyers were attracted by the low price and low running costs, but also by the Mini's inalienable character and the nostalgia factor. Reflecting that, Austin Rover launched a multitude of special editions, starting with the upmarket Mayfair, which quickly became a standard model, then cars like the aptly named Mary Quant designed Mini Designer, the tennis-themed Mini Advantage, and the Red Hot, the Jet Black, the Ritz, the Chelsea, the Piccadilly, and loads more. This was until the Mini really got what it deserved in 1990 when Rover's Special Products division relaunched the Mini Cooper. It had a white roof, white stripes, spot lamps, alloy wheels and a 1275cc engine from the MG Metro. At first it too was a limited edition, but it proved so popular that Rover made it a standard part of the range. As Austin Rover moved itself up market and became simply Rover, the Mini was once again a chic small car. No longer the economy model, instead stylish and retro. That's what we see happen through the reintroduction of the Cooper and the following decade. This one is a Mayfair after it became a standard part of the range and took the place of the HL at the top of the Mini range after that name was abandoned. So in 1989 the Mini range was very simple: City and Mayfair. Despite this being the most luxurious Mini, that term is pretty relative. You'll notice the Halfords looking wheel trims and the side repeater that became mandatory in 1986. Minis had also gotten their chrome back by this point, although the City and Mayfair had to make do with a black one. Another thing I want to talk about is the badging on the front. For most of the 80s, the Mini was marketed as an Austin, but that mark was dropped in 1987, leaving the Mini, Metro, Maestro and Montijo almost as marks of their own. The shield badge on the bonnet used to carry the name Mini, but that was moved down to the bottom of the grille where the Austin badge once resided. Inside it is very, very grey, or as Rover would prefer, granite. As I mentioned before, it does have the Clubman style instrument cluster that all Minis of this era had, as opposed to the classic centre speedo of earlier Minis. This 3-spoke steering wheel is lovely and my favourite of all the British Leyland Austin Rover wheels. It's the same reason I have one of these on my Metro. Behind it are equally classic BL stalks, the same ones you'll find on Minis for years, Marinas, Allegros, Land Rovers, Rover SD1s, early Metros, etc, etc. Indicators, main beam and horn on the left and your twin speed wipers on the right. Beyond this, switchgear is at its minimum. The centre switch panel carries both the choke and heater controls, then rocker style switches for the heated rear window, rear fog lamp, hazard lights and headlamps, along with a brake fluid warning that illuminates to check the bulb when you press it. Below that panel is the basic heater box. Despite its age, it was still a very practical car, as though it lacked a glove box, this T-shelf is enormous and it has proper door bins and those huge companion boxes in the back. The Mini is only 3 metres long and about 1.4 metres wide, and within that space you can happily fit 4 people, and 4.1 cubic feet of luggage in the boot with the fuel tank, battery and spare wheel. This car has 3 optional extras: a sunroof, a radio that's positioned in front of the passenger because of Alec Kitagonis' distaste for distractions, and an automatic gearbox. The Mini first got a slush box in 1965, and for a car of this size, that was pretty early. Let's go and have a look at it from under the bonnet. Under the bonnet is the faithful old A series, here in A+ form at 998cc. It's an overhead valve 4-cylinder engine, and it rears its head in pretty much every BMC, BL, Austin Rover car from the 50s through to the 80s. Here it produces about 40 brake horsepower at 5,250 RPM and about 68 pound-feet of torque at 2,500 revs. You'll notice the engine is entirely central in the engine bay, and that's because of course the Mini has the gearbox in the sump. The automatic box on this car does have 4 speeds, but it still blunts the performance somewhat. Top speed is 78 miles an hour and 0 to 60 takes 22 seconds. Bear in mind the Cooper could do it in 10. This little automatic Mayfair will do 45 mpg though. You may notice again that it is very, very clean under here. You may have also noticed the odometer reading, 2,000 miles. No, that is not 102,000. The car was bought from Evans Halshaw in Solihull on the 1st of August 1989 by Penelope Hughes. She was retired and only really used the car to go to the shops. She decided to stop driving 4 years later, and in that time she'd only put 1,800 miles on her little Mini. The car was left in the garage until she sadly passed away in 2016. Her family then pulled the car out of the garage and got in an MOT before Alex bought the car a year later. As you'd expect, it has a full service history save for that 22-year layup. It even carries the last tax disc Penelope bought for the Mini, which expired in 1994. Alex does have his own YouTube channel where he messes about with his collection of Minis. I'll leave a link to it in the description. Please do check it out. So that's the story of how Rover kept the Mini ticking over through the 1980s, though it was in the 90s that the Mini really came back into its own, as its charm and character won people's hearts all over again. But that's a story for another day. For now, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please do click like and subscribe to TwinCam as well. It really, really helps. And I'll have more videos coming along soon.